Exploitation cinema wasn't just trashy fun. Sometimes it was a full-blown war between filmmakers, censors, and angry mobs. These weren't films that quietly slipped under the radar. These were the ones that had cops storming theaters, reels snatched mid-show, and audiences running for the exits in disgust. What movie could possibly be so wild that people got dragged out of cinemas in handcuffs? Let's dive into the chaos and uncover the 15 most notorious cases that lit fires across America. Blood Feast, 1963. It looked like a cheap horror flick, but this one became the birthplace of gore as a selling point. Herschel Gordon Lewis, a filmmaker with more nerve than budget, gave the world Blood Feast, a Miami-set nightmare about a caterer chopping up women for an Egyptian goddess. The acting was wooden, the sets cardboard, but none of that mattered. What shocked audiences was the blood. Bright red, fake as paint, and splattered across the screen in ways no one had dared before. Police in several U.S. cities actually raided screenings. Censors declared it unfit for civilized viewing. Yet Lewis knew the outrage was his best friend. He leaned in, hiring nurses to stand outside theaters and marketing it as too shocking for human eyes. Viewers fainted, some even vomited, but the ticket sales piled up. Made for around $24,000, it grossed millions in grindhouses, proving there was money in disgust. Critics trashed it as amateur garbage. Lewis, grinning, called their insults the best advertising I ever got. Blood Feast didn't just spark outrage, it invented a new genre. The so-called splatter movie was born, and America's moral guardians had a brand new enemy. To this day, it stands as proof that sometimes the cheapest gimmick can change cinema forever. Love Camp 7, 1969. How far can filmmakers push audiences before the law stepped in? Love Camp 7 answered that question. Directed by Lee Frost, it followed two American agents undercover in a World War II camp. What unspooled on screen was a relentless parade of cruelty that critics labeled as degrading beyond belief. This wasn't just frowned upon, it ignited fury across the country. Feminist groups staged protests wherever it played. In Chicago, activists stormed a theater mid-screening, dousing the screen with red paint. The chaos ended with multiple arrests and national headlines. Censors refused to rate it, and cities like Boston and Los Angeles simply banned it outright. Even decades later, in the 1980s and early 2000s, it remained blacklisted in several countries. Financially, though, the film thrived underground. Reports suggest it cleared over $2 million through rentals and grindhouse circuits. Frost later bragged that he had no regrets. Shock rocker Rob Zombie once called it one of the most messed up films of its time. Here was the paradox. The harder activists tried to bury it, the more audiences sought it out. Theaters framed it as forbidden fruit, and ticket lines stretched around the block. Love Camp 7 became the blueprint for countless imitators, proving outrage could be monetized like never before. The Touch of Her Flesh, 1967. Michael Finley wasn't trying to make art, he was trying to pay rent. With his wife Roberta as the lead, he filmed The Touch of Her Flesh, a cheap revenge thriller about a war veteran who loses his mind after a car accident and begins hunting women. It was raw, ugly, and shot with a budget that wouldn't buy a family sedan. But this no-frills grindhouse flick ignited a firestorm. Boston and Detroit banned it completely, labeling it dangerous. Canadian officials seized imported prints. And in New Jersey, a theater owner was actually arrested for screening it. Instead of shutting down, he defiantly kept running the reels, turning his theater into a magnet for curious crowds. The movie's popularity spawned two sequels, creating what fans now call the Flesh Trilogy. Roberta Finley later admitted bluntly, "We made filth because filth paid the bills." That honesty summed up the era. Exploitation cinema wasn't about artistry. It was about pushing limits until authorities snapped. Despite being trashed by critics, the trilogy developed a loyal fan base. To many Grindhouse fans, The Touch of Her Flesh is remembered less for its story and more for the uproar it caused. In the end, it showed how even the cheapest, ugliest film could become infamous if it provoked the right kind of anger. Olga's House of Shame, 1964. Before 50 Shades and all the glossy takes on power and control, there was Olga's House of Shame, a gritty underground shocker shot guerrilla style in New York. Audrey Campbell starred as Olga, a merciless crime boss running a racket that put women under her iron grip. The cast was mostly dancers paid under the table, the equipment borrowed, and the dialogue dubbed later. Audiences had never seen anything like it. Churches, parent groups, and feminist activists demanded bans. Cities like Chicago and Los Angeles outlawed it. In Boston, theaters were threatened with closure if they dared screen it. Yet in Times Square, it ran for 40 straight weeks and grossed over $2 million from a budget of less than $20,000. Censors in the UK never gave it a rating, and British officials kept it banned outright. The film's notoriety only fed its success. Protesters outside theaters inadvertently gave it free advertising. Campbell became an underground icon, while director Joseph Mara found himself the unlikely architect of an entire mini-genre of Olga films. What's wild is how such a scrappy production snowballed into one of the most profitable exploitation hits of its time. Olga's House of Shame proved that outrage wasn't just inevitable, it was profitable. The Naked Kiss, 1964. Samuel Fuller wasn't an exploitation director in the traditional sense, but with the WAC. Naked Kiss. He delivered a film so provocative that theater owners risked losing their licenses if they screened it. Constance Towers played Kelly, a former call girl trying to start fresh in a small town. Instead of redemption, she finds corruption lurking behind closed doors, and in one shocking scene, she bludgeons a man to death with a telephone receiver. The film was immediately condemned by the Catholic Legion of Decency and banned in several American states. Even critics recoiled, calling it immoral and indecent. The UK refused to certify it until 1990, nearly 3 decades after its release. Yet over time, the movie's reputation transformed. Quentin Tarantino praised Fuller as the original punk filmmaker. Martin Scorsese hailed The Naked Kiss as decades ahead of its time. And Towers herself defended it fiercely for years. What started as a scandal eventually became a masterpiece, but in 1964, it was treated like poison. Fuller had dared to pull the curtain back on the rot behind small-town respectability, and the establishment couldn't handle it. If exploitation is about poking the sore spots of society, The Naked Kiss did it with surgical precision. Vixen, 1968. Russ Meyer wasn't called the king of exploitation for nothing, and Vixen was the film that made him untouchable. Shot for under $80,000, it followed a free-spirited Canadian woman causing chaos everywhere she went. But what really sent shockwaves wasn't the budget or the plot. It was the taboos it steamrolled right over. Interracial intimacy, boundary-breaking encounters, and scandalous family undertones were all on display, and censors across America completely lost it. Cities like Dallas, Miami, and Boston outright banned the movie. In Los Angeles, it ran for nearly a year straight, but elsewhere, police stormed theaters and seized reels. One theater owner was even arrested for refusing to pull it from the marquee. The outrage reached Washington. In 1969, the U.S. Senate actually cited Vixen in an obscenity investigation, treating it like a national threat. The backlash only supercharged ticket sales. Vixen made over $8 million at the box office, turning Meyer into a millionaire and solidifying his reputation as a rebel director. He later said it was the film that made him rich enough to tell Hollywood to get lost. The movie didn't just cross lines, it redrew them. By forcing courts and lawmakers to wrestle with what counted as obscenity, Vixen actually reshaped film law in America. It was proof that exploitation could become more than just sleaze, it could become a cultural earthquake. The Defilers, 1965. Producer David F. Friedman once said he didn't make movies, he made money. The Defilers was a prime example. Directed by Lee Frost, it told the story of 2 sleazy playboys kidnapping a young woman and subjecting her to a life of torment. Even by exploitation standards, it was shocking, and the public backlash was intense. In Los Angeles, police raided theaters, citing obscenity laws. Morality groups picketed outside screenings with signs declaring it a stain on society. Newspapers blasted it as depraved trash unfit for American audiences. For Friedman and Frost, though, the controversy was priceless advertising. The movie made a killing on the Grindhouse circuit, pulling in 6 figures on a shoestring budget. Friedman later bragged that the protests had practically written his marketing campaign for him. He leaned into the outrage, plastering newspaper quotes like "worst film ever made" on posters as though they were badges of honor. The strategy worked. Crowds flocked to see the film everyone was trying to shut down. In the end, The Defilers became infamous not just for what was on screen, but for how it exposed the tug-of-war between free expression and public decency. For the filmmakers, it was vindication. For their critics, it was proof America's cultural values were slipping fast. She-Devils on Wheels, 1968. What happens when you take Herschel Gordon Lewis, the godfather of gore, and point his camera at a girl biker gang? You get She-Devils on Wheels, a wild, over-the-top exploitation flick about an all-female motorcycle crew laying down their own brutal code of justice. They raced, they rumbled, and they made sure no man pushed them around. For 1968 America, this was explosive. The sight of women on motorcycles beating up rivals and living by their own rules sent traditional audiences into panic mode. In Florida, church groups organized boycotts, warning parents that it would corrupt the youth. Some drive-ins refused to book it, fearing local backlash. The controversy made it irresistible to the counterculture. College kids, rebels, and Grindhouse fans showed up in droves. The low-budget chaos mixed with stunts and outrageous one-liners turned it into a cult classic. Lewis himself later admitted it wasn't one of his best films, but its legacy wasn't about quality. It was about rebellion. She-Devils on Wheels captured the spirit of a generation pushing back against rules and restrictions. By daring to show women in control of their own destiny and their own gang, it became an unlikely flashpoint in the exploitation canon. The Immoral Mr. T's, 1959. Before Blood Feast, before Vixen, there was The Immoral Mr. T's, the little film that started the entire American exploitation revolution. Russ Meyer, a former photographer for the military, made it on a budget of just $24,000. It told the story of an ordinary salesman who suddenly sees the world in a very different way, leading to one absurd adventure after another. What made it so controversial wasn't the comedy, but the audacity. In 1959, American cinema still lived under strict content codes. Meyer found a loophole and went all in. Audiences lined up for miles, while police in multiple states confiscated prints, declaring it obscene. The film was banned outright in several cities, but that didn't stop it from grossing more than $1 million, a staggering sum for the time. Critics mocked it as trash, but Meyer didn't care. He had proven that independent filmmakers could sidestep Hollywood and get rich off controversy alone. The Immoral Mr. T's didn't just cause boycotts and arrests, it rewrote the playbook for what independent cinema could be. In hindsight, it's almost tame compared to what came later. But in 1959, it was a cultural bombshell. Without Mr. T's, the entire world of American exploitation might never have existed. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. No exploitation list is complete without this lightning rod of controversy. Released under the title Day of the Woman, Miyazarki's grim revenge thriller was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. It told the story of a young writer attacked in the woods who later takes vengeance on her tormentors. Brutal and unrelenting, the movie made viewers squirm in their seats from the very first screening. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Feminist groups across America called for boycotts, arguing it glorified cruelty instead of condemning it. Some theaters that dared to show it were picketed day and night. In certain states, police seized prints outright, citing obscenity laws. Critics piled on. Roger Ebert famously walked out of a screening and later called it a vile bag of garbage. But here's the twist. Audiences still showed up. Underground circuits and grindhouse theaters made it a word-of-mouth phenomenon. The more protests swirled around it, the more ticket buyers wanted to see what the noise was about. By the end of the decade, I Spit on Your Grave had cemented itself as one of the most notorious exploitation films ever released in the US. For many, it wasn't a movie. It was a dare. To this day, it divides audiences. Is it unwatchable trash or a raw expression of anger? Either way, it sparked real-world raids, protests, and arrests, making it one of the clearest examples of exploitation cinema colliding with public outrage. Snuff, 1976. Imagine a low-budget thriller repackaged as real murder caught on camera. That was the marketing stunt behind Snuff. Directed by Michael and Roberta Findlay, it began life as a forgettable cheapie about a cult in South America. But when distributor Alan Shackleton got his hands on it, he added a staged ending that claimed to show an actual killing on screen. Then he slapped the word snuff on the title card and unleashed it on American theaters. The reaction was explosive. Audiences believed the hype, flooding police stations with complaints. In multiple cities, officers stormed theaters mid-screening, confiscated reels, and shut down showings. Protesters demanded criminal charges. The FBI even investigated only to discover the so-called real murder was just a clumsy special effect. The controversy made it a sensation. Long lines formed outside grindhouses, with curious moviegoers eager to see what the government was trying to bury. Shackleton laughed all the way to the bank, turning a dud into a legend. Critics hated it, but in Exploitation, bad reviews were just more advertising. Snuff proved that a bold enough lie, if packaged the right way, could terrify authorities, outrage communities, and sell out theaters. Mondo Cane, though originally an Italian import, it was the American distributors who transformed Mondo Cane into a scandalous sensation. Marketed not as documentary but as a shock reel of forbidden sights, it promised to reveal bizarre customs and violent spectacles from around the globe. In conservative parts of the U.S., police treated it as pure obscenity. Southern states seized reels, and morality boards banned it outright. Newspaper headlines blasted it as barbaric trash parading as culture. Some screenings even sparked walkouts, with horrified viewers demanding refunds. Yet in big cities, the opposite happened. Curious audiences packed theaters, fascinated by its mix of exotic travelogue and shocking imagery. The controversy gave it credibility with the underground crowd. Drive-ins in particular turned it into a moneymaker, pulling in audiences looking for something dangerous. Mondo Cane blurred the line between documentary and exploitation. By packaging staged or exaggerated footage as truth, it tricked audiences and infuriated officials. For many, it wasn't the content itself, but the audacity of the marketing that sparked raids and boycotts. One thing was clear: the more authorities tried to crush it, the bigger its legend grew. The Acid Eaters, 1968. Psychedelic exploitation was its own wild corner of cinema, and the Acid Eaters rode that wave straight into scandal. Directed by Byron Mabe, it followed a group of office workers who moonlight as hedonists at a secret commune where drugs and wild antics fuel bizarre adventures. The visuals were trippy, the tone chaotic, and the message, if there was one, got lost in the swirl of neon colors. In Utah and parts of the Midwest, police didn't care whether it was satire or not. They raided theaters, accusing the film of glorifying drug culture. Local papers warned parents it would encourage youth to drop out and tune in. Even in New York, screenings were pulled after community leaders protested outside theaters. The controversy, of course, made it irresistible. Young audiences flocked to see it, especially in college towns where it became a cult favorite. The bright colors, outrageous imagery, and total lack of restraint turned it into a midnight movie staple. The legacy of the Acid Eaters isn't about quality. Most critics dismissed it as nonsense, but about how perfectly it captured the anxiety of its era. In the middle of America's counterculture wars, one goofy exploitation flick was enough to send police charging through theater doors. Forced Entry, 1963. Of all the low-budget shockers to trigger outrage, few hit harder than Forced Entry. Directed by Sean Costello, it told the story of a disturbed Vietnam veteran spiraling into violent paranoia. Shot for practically nothing, it combined gritty New York locations with raw, unsettling violence. The reaction was instantaneous. In several states, police seized prints and filed obscenity charges. Theater owners were arrested, some dragged out of their own venues in handcuffs. Critics wrote it off as a dangerous symptom of America's cultural breakdown. Yet, like so many titles on this list, controversy made it profitable. Underground theaters and drive-ins played it to packed crowds, billing it as the movie too hot for the law. Audiences showed up partly out of curiosity, partly for the thrill of watching something forbidden. For many, Forced Entry is remembered less for its story and more for the chaos it caused. It highlighted the razor-thin line between free expression and criminal prosecution in the 1970s. In the end, it didn't just provoke outrage, it became a symbol of how far exploitation filmmakers were willing to go and how far authorities were willing to chase them. So there you have it. 15 exploitation films that didn't just rattle audiences, they rattled the law. These weren't just movies. They were battlegrounds where filmmakers, cops, and protesters clashed in real time. And here's the kicker. The more the authorities tried to crush them, the more audiences craved them. Which of these notorious titles do you think went too far? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and remember, sometimes the messiest films leave the deepest marks on history.